I fixed a veteran's son's bike for free and got fired. The next morning, veterans showed up at my door, and what they offered changed my life forever. It's funny how life can turn on a dime. One day you're cruising along, thinking you got everything figured out, and the next you're standing in your kitchen at 3 a.m., staring at a Post-it note on the fridge that just torpedoed your entire existence. That was me 3 years ago, in my little fixer-upper in Denver, Colorado. My name is Scott McClear. I'm 35, a bike mechanic at Trail Stop Bikes, or at least I was until yesterday, and a full-time single dad to my 7-year-old daughter, Ellie. She's the one who draws rainbows with chalk on nearly every wall of our house. I stopped trying to wash them off about 2 years ago. Some battles just aren't worth fighting. And honestly, the rainbows are the brightest things in our home these days. I still remember that morning perfectly. October 17th, 2020, exactly 3 years ago. I woke up to an empty bed. Nothing unusual there. Melissa was always an early riser. I shuffled the kitchen to make coffee, half asleep, when I saw it. A yellow Post-it note stuck to the fridge. 5 words that changed everything. Need a different life. Goodbye. No explanation. No tears. No dramatic scene like in the movies. Just a Post-it note, a half-empty closet, and her wedding ring left on the bathroom counter. Later I found out she'd moved to Phoenix with some CrossFit instructors she met at her gym. They're living in some fancy condo now, posting hiking photos on Instagram. I'm not on Instagram, but Melissa's sister felt I needed to know all this. I didn't. I took that note and burned in the kitchen sink that night after Ellie went to bed. Watching the paper curl and blacken, I whispered to myself, Ellie is my anchor now. Sounded profound at 2 a.m. after 3 beers, but it's turned out to be the truest thing I've ever said. Life after Melissa left was an adjustment. Suddenly, I was solely responsible for a 4-year-old girl with strong opinions about everything from breakfast cereals to bedtime stories. I was also solely responsible for a mortgage that had been calculated based on 2 incomes, car payments, and a leak in the upstairs bathroom that keeps coming back no matter how many YouTube tutorials I follow. My dad was a Vietnam vet who believed in self-reliance above all else. A man fixes his own problems, he'd say. Well, Dad, I'm trying. My alarm goes off at 5 a.m. every weekday. The coffee maker is older than Ellie, but it gets the job done. Just like me. While the coffee brews, I pack Ellie's lunch. Usually a PB&J sandwich cut into triangles, never squares. That's apparently a cardinal sin in 2nd grade. Apple slices, and whatever snack was on sale at Kroger that week. Then I tackle whatever household crisis needs immediate attention. Supergluing the sole of Ellie's sneaker back on, unclogging the bathroom drain, or trying to coax the ancient washing machine through one more cycle. By 6:30, it's time to wake up Ellie, which is like trying to negotiate with a very small, very grumpy dictator. She inherits that from her mother. By 7:15, we're in my 2008 Toyota Corolla with 187,000 miles on it, halfway to her school, and I'm listening to her explain the intricate social dynamics of 2nd grade while mentally calculating if I have enough gas to make it until payday. I drop her off at school with our ritual, a high five, a nose boop, and our secret phrase. Brave hearts, smart minds. Then I race to Trail Stop Bikes, usually clocking in about 3 minutes late, much to the annoyance of my boss, Bert. Bert Hargrove has owned Trail Stop Bikes for 22 years and has the personality of a man who's been sucking on lemons for all of them. He's about 60, with a permanent scowl etched into his face, and he runs a shop like at a military operation. 5 minutes late? That's $20 off your paycheck. Customer complaint? That's a formal write-up. He once called me a snail on tranquilizers because I spent too long explaining gear ratios to a first-time mountain biker. But the thing is, customers love me. I'm not the fastest mechanic, but I listen. I remember their kids' names and ask about their trails. I tell dad jokes that make teenagers roll their eyes but secretly smile. When Mrs. Abernathy, who must be pushing 80, brings in her ancient Schwinn cruiser, I take extra time adjusting the seat just right because I know her arthritis is bad, and Bert can just deal with it. That's how I survived at Trail Stop for 7 years despite Bert's constant threats. I'm good with people, decent with bikes, and until yesterday, I thought that was enough. It was Saturday, usually our busiest day. I was elbow deep in a chain replacement when I noticed this kid hanging around outside the shop. Couldn't have been older than 10, skinny with a mop of dark hair, shuffling back and forth near the entrance with a mangled bike by his side. The front wheel was bent almost in half, like it had been in a serious collision. I finished up with my customer and stepped outside. The kid looked up with these huge brown eyes, red-rimmed like he'd been crying. He introduced himself as Tyler and explained that the bike was his dad's old mountain bike. His dad was deployed with the Army, and Tyler had promised to take care of it until he got back. But he'd taken it off a jump that was bigger than he thought, and now he was sure his dad would be disappointed in him. Something about this kid's story hit me right in the chest. Maybe it was the way he was trying so hard not to cry, or maybe it was thinking about my own dad, who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam before I was born. Dad never talked much about his time there, but he taught me that a man's word is everything. A wrench is a promise, son, Dad used to say while we worked on his old Chevy in the garage. If you say you'll fix something, you better follow through, even if your fingers bleed. I looked at Tyler's busted bike and then back at the shop, where Bert was watching with his arms crossed. I knew the kid couldn't afford the repairs. I also knew what my dad would do. I told Tyler to bring the bike around to the back of the shop. For the next 2 hours, I worked on it during my lunch break and between customers. The front wheel was beyond saving, so I pulled a good used one from our inventory. The frame needed straightening. The handlebars were scratched up badly, and the gears needed a complete overhaul. I used parts from our stock, marking them as used and repair in my head, figuring I'd explain to Bert later and offer to pay for them out of my next check. When I finished, the bike wasn't perfect, but it was solid, safe, rideable. Tyler's face when I wheeled it out was worth every minute of the work. I told him it was free of charge, called him champ, and sent him on his way. He said I was like Spider-Man, but with wrenches instead of web shooters. Not gonna lie, that felt pretty good. What didn't feel good was turning around to find Bert staring at me, face red as a stop sign. He'd seen everything on the security camera. His first words weren't fit to repeat in polite company, but they centered around me stealing his inventory for some random brat. I explained about Tyler's dad being deployed, about the promise the kid had made. I told Bert I'd pay for the parts myself. But Bert wasn't having it. He started shouting about principles in theft and making examples. The whole shop went quiet. Customers, other mechanics, everyone staring. I didn't raise my voice. Just said, it was for a soldier's son, Bert. That's when he fired me. Right there, in front of everyone. Told me to clean out my locker and never come back. 7 years, ended over a kid's bike. I didn't argue. Just packed my tools into my old metal toolbox, the one Dad gave me when I turned 18, and walked out. As I was leaving, I noticed a teenager, Zach, one of our regular customers, filming the whole thing on his phone. Great. Social media humiliation would be the perfect cherry on my unemployment Sunday. The drive home was a blur. All I could think about was how I'd tell Ellie, how I'd make rent next month, whether I could get unemployment if I was fired for theft. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. When I got home, Ellie was at the neighbor's house where she stays on Saturdays when I work. Mrs. Patel took one look at my face and didn't ask questions, just sent Ellie home with me in a container of homemade butter chicken. The kindness nearly broke me right there. That night, after dinner, Ellie asked the question I've been dreading. Daddy, are we poor now? Kids have radar for these things. They pick up on stress like little emotional Geiger counters. I pulled her onto my lap, this little girl with my eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, and tried to find the right words. Ellie Belly, poor isn't about money, I told her. Poor is not having your smile in my life. Poor is not hearing your laugh. Poor is not watching you draw those amazing rainbows. And we have all those things, so we're the richest people in Colorado. Okay, so maybe it was a bit cheesy, but she bought it, smiled and hugged me tight enough to make my ribs hurt. Then she hopped down and went to get her crayons. Crisis averted for now. But the truth? I was terrified. Bike mechanics don't exactly have headhunters chasing them down. Denver's cost of living isn't forgiving. And despite having full custody of Ellie, getting any financial support from Melissa was like pulling teeth. After the divorce, the judge ordered her to contribute, but her payments were sporadic at best. The last check came 4 months ago, and my calls to her went straight to voicemail. I couldn't afford a lawyer to chase it down, so I just tightened the belt and kept moving forward. Later that night, try and make Ellie laugh, I pulled out one of my classic dad jokes. You know why I'm the best dad? Because I can fix anything, even your bad mood. She groaned dramatically, then shot back that I still couldn't fix our dripping kitchen faucet. So maybe I wasn't the repair god I claimed to be. The kids got wit, I'll give her that. After I tucked her in, singing Sweet Caroline like I do every night, despite having a voice that makes crows cover their ears, I sat on the edge of her bed looking at her latest wall art. It was a bicycle with wings, flying over what appeared to be our house. Next to it, she'd drawn a stick figure with a wrench for a hand. Me, obviously in superhero form. I thought about what my dad used to tell me. Kindness is like a lug nut. Son, you tighten it down hard, even if your fingers bleed. Because when the wheel comes loose at 60 miles per hour, it's that extra quarter turn that saves lives. For years, I thought that lug nut was going to crush me. Being kind when Melissa left. Not fighting for more than a divorce, because I didn't want Ellie to see ugliness. Being patient with customers when Bert was breathing down my neck about efficiency. And now, fixing a bike for a kid with deployed dad had cost me my job. But looking at Ellie's drawing, something shifted inside me. Maybe the lug nut hadn't crushed me after all. Maybe it had been holding me together this whole time. I won't give up, kiddo, I whispered to my sleeping daughter. Whatever comes next, we face it together. I went to bed with no plan, just a vague notion that I'd hit the pavement in the morning, application in hand at every bike shop in Denver. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to. I must have finally fallen asleep around 2 a.m. after hours of staring at the ceiling fan, mentally calculating how long my savings would last. Not long was a depressing answer. The next thing I knew, a loud knocking jolted me awake. I squinted at the bedside clock. 6 a.m., Sunday morning. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. My heart jumped into my throat. Nobody brings good news at 6 a.m. on a Sunday. Was it the police? Had something happened to Melissa? Was someone hurt? I stumbled out of bed, pulling on yesterday's jeans from the floor. The knocking continued, steady and determined. Ellie was still asleep, thanks to her ability to sleep through practically anything short of an actual tornado. I made my way down the hallway, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. The floorboard near the bathroom creaked under my foot like it always does. Through the window, I could see the sky was just beginning to lighten, the Colorado mountains dark, silhouettes against the dawn. The knocking came again. 1, 2, 3 solid thumps. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the knob. Who is it? I called, my voice rough with sleep and anxiety. I froze, waiting for an answer, wondering who on earth could be at my door so early and what new challenge life was about to throw my way. I took a deep breath and pulled the door open, squinting against the early morning light. The adrenaline from being jolted awake had my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing on my worn welcome mat were 3 men I'd never seen before in my life. 2 of them wore leather jackets with veteran patches sewn across the shoulders and chests, one tall and lean with military straight posture, the other stockier with forearms like tree trunks. But it was the third guy who caught my attention, an older man with a full head of silver hair and a beard to match. He had laugh lines etched deep around his eyes and a smile that reminded me of mall Santa's, minus the red suit. For a split second, my sleep-deprived brain wondered if I was being pranked. Who shows up at someone's door at 6 a.m. on a Sunday unless it's an emergency or they're selling religion? Scott McClear, the Santa-looking guy asked, his voice gravelly but warm. I nodded cautiously, one hand still on the door, ready to slam it if needed. Living in Denver had taught me some street smarts, even in my relatively decent neighborhood. We saw the video, the taller veteran added. You're the bike guy, right? My brain wasn't processing. Video? What video? The three men exchanged glances. The silver-haired man stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm Frank Daniels. These are my friends, Pete and Marcus. I think we should talk. May we come in? Every stranger danger alarm in my head was ringing, but something about Frank's eyes made me hesitate. They were kind, honest, the kind of eyes my dad had, the ones I could see right through bull. I let them in, suddenly aware of my ratty Denver Broncos t-shirt and bed hair. The house wasn't exactly visitor-ready either. Ellie's toys littered the living room floor, and last night's pizza box was still on the coffee table. I mumbled an apology for the mess, but Frank waved it away like it wasn't even worth mentioning. Coffee, I offered, falling back on the universal host protocol. Frank nodded gratefully. Black as oil, if you've got it. While I brewed a fresh pot, Frank explained what the video was. Apparently, that kid Zach in the shop had filmed the whole showdown with Bert yesterday. Me fixing Tyler's bike, Bert confronting me, the firing, all of it. Zach had posted it on TikTok last night with a caption, "This is what a real hero looks like." By the time my 3 unexpected guests showed up at my door, the video had over 8 million views. 8 million? I don't understand, I said, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. I'm not on TikTok. That's for teenagers and people who dance. Frank chuckled, accepting his mug with a nod of thanks. Not anymore, son. It's where stories like yours spread like wildfire. The comment section is blowing up. People are calling you a hometown hero. They're ripping Bert a new one, pardon my French. Someone even started a GoFundMe for you. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. A what for me? Marcus, the stockier veteran, pulled out his phone and showed me. There was a fundraiser with my name and face, a screenshot from the video, already at $27,000 and climbing. The description read, "Help Scott, a single dad who lost his job for helping a military kid." I felt my knees go weak and sank into a kitchen chair. This is insane. I'm not Kim Kardashian. I just fix a kid's bike. Frank's eyes crinkled. That's exactly why people are responding, Scott. You're real. In a world full of fake, you're the genuine article. Pete, who'd been quiet until then, leaned forward. But we're not here about the GoFundMe. That's just people showing support. We're here because of what that video showed us about you. I must have looked confused because Frank jumped in to explain. He was a Vietnam vet who'd founded an organization called Wheels of Honor 7 years ago. They provided transportation solutions for veterans and their families. Everything from car repairs to bike donations. We've been wanting to expand into a full-service bike shop, Frank said. A place where vets can bring their kids, where military families can get quality repairs at prices they can afford, where teenagers can learn trade skills. When we saw how you handled Tyler and that bike, and how you stood up to your boss, we knew you were exactly who we've been looking for. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The whole situation was so absurd. Yesterday I'd been fired and terrified about making rent. Today 3 strangers were in my kitchen talking about, what exactly? What are you saying? I asked. Frank set his mug down with a decisive thunk. We want to offer you a grant to open your own bike shop, Scott. Wheels of Honor would provide the initial funding, help with the lease, supply you with inventory to start. The shop will be yours to run, but with a mission to serve veterans and their families, as well as community kids who need help. The kitchen went silent. I could hear the old refrigerator humming, the drip of the perpetually leaking faucet, Ellie turning over in her sleep down the hall. This is a joke, right? I finally managed. Frank shook his head. No joke. We've been looking to open a Denver location for months. Finding the right person to run it has been the holdup. You're that person. But you don't even know me, I protested. I could be terrible with money. I could be a drunk. Hell, I don't even own a decent pair of pants without grease stains. Frank's laugh rumbled through the kitchen. Son, we did our homework. Called some of your regular customers after we saw the video. Everyone said the same thing. You're the most honest mechanic in Denver. As for the pants. He gestured to his own jeans, which had seen better days. Heroes don't wear capes. They wear jeans with grease stains. My experience. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process what was happening. I don't know the first thing about running a business. I fix bikes. That's it. And you connect with people, Pete added. That's the part that can't be taught. At that moment, a sleepy voice came from the hallway. Daddy? Who's talking? For heads turned to see Ellie standing in the doorway, her unicorn pajamas rumpled, blonde hair sticking up in all directions. She squinted suspiciously at our visitors. Are they here about the dragon? She asked gravely. I bit back a smile. Ellie and I had an ongoing game about a dragon living in our basement, my explanation for the weird noises our ancient furnace made. No, sweetheart, I said. These are new friends. This is Frank, Pete, and Marcus. Frank's face lit up at the sight of her. You must be the famous Ellie. Your dad's told us so much about you. This was a blatant lie since I'd barely mentioned her, but Ellie beamed, instantly won over. Do you want to see my rainbows? She asked, already grabbing Frank's hand to drag him toward her bedroom wall gallery. I watched as the silver-haired veteran happily allowed himself to be led away by a 7-year-old in unicorn pajamas. Pete and Marcus followed, exchanging amused glances. 10 minutes later, Frank had examined every rainbow, complimented every crayon creation, and even added a small doodle of his own, a bicycle with streamers, to Ellie's approval. By the time we all returned to the kitchen, Ellie had declared Frank her new best friend and was chattering away about her second-grade science project on butterflies. I made Ellie breakfast, Lucky Charms, her Sunday treat, while Frank outlined more details about the proposal. The organization would provide a $75,000 grant to get the shop up and running. I'd have full operational control, but would need to offer discounted services to veterans and run youth programs. They already had a location in mind, an old garage in a decent neighborhood that had been sitting empty for months. This isn't just a business opportunity, Scott, Frank said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, while Ellie was distracted by her cereal. It's a calling. A calling. The word hung in the air between us. My dad used to talk about callings, said it was serving his country, then raising me right after Mom died. I'd never thought I had one. I was just a guy trying to keep his head above water, trying not to screw up his kid too badly. I don't know. I admit it. This is a lot to take in. What if I'm not cut out for it? What if I fail and waste your money? Frank nodded like he'd been expecting this. Doubt is good. Shows you take it seriously. But here's what I know after 73 years on this earth. The people who worry about failing are rarely the ones who do. After Ellie finished breakfast, she insisted on showing the men her bike, which was kept in our tiny backyard shed. While they were outside, I stood at my kitchen window, watching Frank kneel down to examine Ellie's wobbly training wheel with the same serious attention he might give a Harley-Davidson. My mind was racing. This was insane. Things like this didn't happen to guys like me. I fixed bikes for a living, had $427 in my savings account, and couldn't get the kitchen sink to stop dripping. I wasn't some inspiring figure who deserved strangers showing up with life-changing offers. But then again, what if? When everyone came back inside, Ellie tugged on my shirt. Daddy, Frank says you might get your own bike shop. Can we paint it purple? I looked at Frank, who shrugged innocently. Purple's a fine color for a bike shop. If we get a shop, I corrected, we'll have to pick a color that makes customers feel welcome. Ellie's face scrunched in thought. Like rainbow. The veterans all laughed, and I couldn't help joining in. Leave it to a 7-year-old to cut through all the adult overthinking. Tell you what, Frank said, pulling a folder from his jacket. These are the grant papers. Take a few days to think it over. Talk to a lawyer. If you want, we'll cover that cost. This isn't a decision to make lightly. I took the folder, feeling its weight in more ways than one. Thank you. I will. After they left, Ellie and I spent Sunday like we always did, pancakes, the park, laundry, homework check. But my mind kept drifting to that folder sitting on my kitchen counter. By the time I tucked Ellie in that night, I'd made up my mind. My dad always said, life throws you curveballs, son. The trick is knowing when to swing. This was my curveball, and I'd be an idiot not to swing. I called Frank the next morning and accepted. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and plans. I had to take a crash course in small business management. I consulted with a lawyer provided by Wheels of Honor. I even had to open a business bank account, which made me feel like I was pretending to be a grown-up more than usual. 2 days after accepting Frank's offer, I got a call from the organizer of that GoFundMe campaign, a local teacher named Sarah who'd seen the video and felt compelled to do something. The fund had reached just over $31,000, and she needed my banking details to transfer the money. I sat in stunned silence on my couch, staring at the wall. That kind of money wasn't life-changing in the grand scheme of things, but to a bike mechanic with $427 in savings, it meant breathing room. It meant not panicking about Ellie's winter clothes or the leak in the roof. It meant a small safety net while I launched into this terrifying new venture. Ellie was over the moon. When I told her about the bike shop, her first question was whether we could buy an airplane next. I laughed and told her she needed to master brushing her teeth without reminders before we expanded into aviation. Throughout the whirlwind, Frank was there, guiding without controlling, suggesting without demanding. One night, after a particularly overwhelming day of inventory planning, I confessed my fears to him. What if I crash and burn, Frank? What if I'm not cut out for this? He considered this, turning his coffee mug slowly in his weather hands. You know what my sergeant told me in Nam? He said, life's like an old bike, Daniels. Sometimes a chain slips off, but you keep pedaling because stopping is an option. You'll hit bumps, Scott. That's guaranteed. But you'll keep pedaling. I thought about that a lot over the next few weeks. About pedaling through the hard parts. About not having the luxury of stopping just because things got tough. Wasn't that what I'd been doing since Melissa left? Since I became a single dad? Keep pedaling. Fix what breaks, adjust the gears when needed, but never, ever stop moving forward. Exactly 1 month after those 3 strangers knocked on my door, Frank handed me a set of keys outside a brick building with large garage doors and windows that needed washing. I stood there, keys in hand, heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. It's really mine? I asked, the metal warm against my palm. Frank clapped a hand on my shoulder, his Santa Claus eyes crinkling at the corners. All yours, son. Welcome to your calling. I clutched those keys like they might vanish if I loosened my grip. The morning sun glinted off them, sending little flashes of light across the sidewalk. In that moment, standing there with Frank, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the lightness of possibility, the weight of purpose. I had no idea what waited behind those doors, but I was about to find out. I stood outside the brick building for a good 5 minutes, just staring at the door. The keys felt heavy in my hand, like they were made of something more significant than metal. Behind me, Frank waited patiently, not rushing this moment. Finally, I took a deep breath, slid the key into the lock, and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, fresh paint and new rubber with undertones of metal and oil. Sunlight struggled through the windows that, despite someone's best efforts, still had streaks and smudges from years of neglect. But the light was enough to illuminate a space that took my breath away. Where I'd expected a bare-bones setup, there was a fully equipped bike shop. Gleaming tools hung on pegboards, neatly organized by size and function. Workbenches lined one wall, each with its own lamp and vise. Bike stands waited at attention. Parts bins, labeled and filled, stood against another wall. And there, above the main counter, hung a hand-painted sign with a familiar image, a bicycle with wings. Ellie's design, professionally rendered, but keeping all the charm of her crayon original. Beneath it, in bold letters, Honor Wheels, built on kindness. Dad, I whispered to the empty air, you would have been proud. It wasn't something I did often, talk to my father as if he could hear me, but in that moment it felt right. Frank stepped in behind me, hands in his pockets. He didn't say anything, just let me take it all in. The silence between us was comfortable, like we'd known each other for years instead of weeks. This is too much. I finally managed. I was expecting an empty garage with maybe a few basic tools. Frank shrugged. Wheels of Honor, Doesn't do anything halfway. Besides, we had donations pouring and once word got out. Turns out, when people see genuine goodness, they want to be part of it. I ran my fingers along the smooth wooden counter. Someone had taken the time to sand it perfectly and finish it with multiple coats of polyurethane. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of care, of craftsmanship, of people believing in this place before it even existed. How do I ever repay this? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Frank's heavy hand landed on my shoulder. By doing exactly what you're already doing, being the kind of man who fixes a kid's bike because it's the right thing to do, everything else is just details. That first day, I was supposed to just set up, get familiar with the space, maybe put together a plan for opening later in the week. But word had already spread through Frank's network and beyond. By 10 a.m., a small crowd had gathered outside. Curious neighbors, veterans from Frank's organization, families with kids clutching broken bikes. They all wanted to see what was happening in the old garage. I couldn't bring myself to turn them away. So at 10:30 a.m., without fanfare or a business plan, Honor Wheels officially opened its doors. Frank stayed, rolling up his sleeves to help with the unexpected rush. My first official customer was Mrs. Garrett, an 87-year-old widow who lived 3 blocks over. She arrived in a taxi, refusing help as she manhandled an ancient red tricycle out of the trunk. The paint was chipped down to metal in places. One of the pedals was missing, and the seat was held together with duct tape. Mrs. Garrett explained that the tricycle had belonged to her late husband, Joe. He bought it back in 1962 when they were newlyweds, and they'd spend Sunday afternoons riding around Washington Park together, her on her bike, him on this ridiculous adult tricycle, not caring one bit how silly he looked. He always says balance wasn't what it used to be after Korea, she told me, her papery hand resting on the rusty handlebars. But I think he just liked making me laugh. Joe had been gone for 12 years now. The tricycle had sat in their garage, untouched until last week, when her great-grandchildren had visited. The youngest, 6-year-old Emma, had spotted it and asked what it was. I told her about Joe and our Sunday rides, Mrs. Garrett said, her eyes misting. And suddenly, I wanted nothing more than to ride that old thing again, to feel close to him. Do you think you can fix it? I know it's in terrible shape. I examined the tricycle. It needed new pedals, new tires, a chain replacement, bearing work, not to mention cosmetic repairs. But the frame was solid steel, built to last. I can fix it, I told her. It'll take a few hours. Do you want to come back tomorrow? Mrs. Garrett shook her head firmly. I'll wait. So I set to work, letting the familiar rhythm of repair calm my nerves about this whole new venture. I rebuilt the pedals from parts, replaced the chain, adjusted the gears, and oiled everything that needed oiling. One of the veterans from Frank's group, an older guy named Hank, turned out to be a hobbyist painter. He offered to touch up the red paint, while I worked on mechanics. By mid-afternoon, the tricycle looked reborn, not showroom new, but solid, clean, and dignified, like an old warrior ready for one more battle. When Mrs. Garrett saw it, she pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Before I knew what was happening, she'd wrapped her thin arms around me in a fierce hug. You brought Joe back to me, she whispered. The shop had gone quiet. Everyone watched as the elderly woman carefully lowered herself onto the seat, gripped the handlebars, and pushed off. She made a slow, wobbly circuit around the shop, her face transformed by a joy so pure it hurt to watch. Someone captured the moment on their phone. By that evening, this video had joined the first one online, further cementing my unexpected internet fame. Mrs. Garrett became a local celebrity, interviewed by the Denver Post about her memory ride, as they called it. When asked what she'd been charged to repair, her answer, not a penny, sparked another round of donations to the shop. I tried to explain to Frank that we couldn't run a business giving away free repairs, but he just winked. Some payments aren't made in dollars, Scott. You'll figure out the balance. The rest of opening day passed in a blur of adjustments, tune-ups, and what felt like half of Denver coming through to see that TikTok Bike Guy's new shop. By closing time, I was exhausted but buzzing with the kind of energy I'd never felt at trail stop bikes. Just as I was about to lock up, Tyler burst through the door, his eyes wide with excitement. He'd grown at least an inch since I'd last seen him, and his dad's bike, the one that had started this whole journey, was slung over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. "Mr. Scott," he exclaimed, bouncing on his toes. "This place is awesome. Can you teach me how to ride backward?" I couldn't help laughing. "Hold up there, speed racer. Maybe learn to ride forward without terrorizing pedestrians first? Save the fast and furious stunts for when you're older." Tyler grinned, not at all deterred. "Dad says I ride like a daredevil. He's back home now. He wanted to come thank you himself, but he's got physical therapy for his leg. But he said I could sign up for your classes." "Classes?" I repeated, glancing at Frank, who suddenly looked very busy organizing already organized tools. "Yeah, the bike repair classes for kids. It's on your website." This was news to me. Apparently, Frank and his team had been busy with more than just renovations. But looking at Tyler's eager face, I couldn't bring myself to disappoint him. "First class starts next Saturday," I said, making a mental note to create said class by then. "Bring your helmet and your patience." The shop quickly fell into a rhythm over the next few weeks. Mornings were for serious repairs, afternoons often filled with kids learning basic maintenance, and veterans finding a quiet place to work with their hands and clear their minds. I hired 2 part-time mechanics to help with the workload, both vets referred by Frank, both exceptional with tools and good with people. Everything was going better than I could have imagined. So, of course, that's when Melissa showed up. I was in the middle of explaining chain maintenance to a group of teenagers when I looked up and saw her standing in the doorway. 3 years had changed her little. Still beautiful in that glossy magazine way, still able to make my chest tighten with a complicated mix of feelings. She waited until class dispersed, then approached the counter, designer purse swinging from her arm. "Scott," she said, her voice softer than I remembered, "I saw you on the news. What you've built here, it's amazing." I wiped my hands on a rag, buying time. The last time we'd spoken had been during a tense phone call about late support payments, ended with her promising to get to it when things settled down, with her yoga instructor certification. "What brings you back to Denver?" I kept my voice neutral, professional, the way I'd talk to any customer. "You actually..." She leaned on the counter, the familiar scent of her perfume bringing back a flood of memories. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I made a mistake, Scott. I was selfish and scared of being tied down. But seeing you now, what you're doing, I think we should try again." The words hung between us, words I'd once desperately wanted to hear. I thought about the nights after she left, how I'd sit on the back porch after Ellie was asleep, nursing a beer, imagining exactly the scenario. Melissa returning, us reconciling, becoming a normal family again, but standing there in my shop, surrounded by the life I'd built without her, those fantasies seemed like they belonged to someone else. "Where's Ellie today?" she asked, glancing around. I brought her something from Phoenix. "She's at school, where she should be on a Tuesday." My tone came out sharper than intended, but I didn't soften it. "Melissa, why are you really here?" She looked genuinely hurt by the question. "I told you, I want us to try again. CrossFit guy is ancient history. I've grown up a lot, and Ellie needs her mother." "Ellie needed her mother 3 years ago," I said quietly. "She needed her mother for the nightmares, for the school projects, for the time she was sick and crying for you. Where were you then?" I could see anger flash across her face, the familiar storm clouds gathering. But before she could respond, the shop door banged open, and Ellie herself came barreling in, followed by Mrs. Patel, who picked her up from school on Tuesdays when I had the youth class. Ellie skidded to a halt when she saw her mother, her expression unreadable. For a terrible moment, I thought she might not even recognize Melissa. But then her face hardened in a way no 7-year-old should. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice small but firm. Melissa knelt down, arms outstretched for a hug that Ellie didn't move to accept. "I missed you, baby. I've come to see you and Daddy. Don't I get a hug?" Ellie looked up at me, then back at her mother, with a solemnity that broke my heart. She stepped back and moved behind me, one hand clutching the leg of my jeans. Melissa stood, flushed with embarrassment and anger. "This is your doing," she hissed at me. "You turned her against me." "No, Melissa, you did that all on your own." I placed a protective hand on Ellie's shoulder. "My home is with Ellie now. There's no place for you there anymore." After Melissa stormed out, Ellie hugged me tight enough to hurt. "You're the best daddy in the whole galaxy," she whispered fiercely. Later that night, after the emotion of the day had settled, I sat on the edge of Ellie's bed, watching her sleep. I thought about Melissa, about the past we'd shared and the futures that might have been. But mostly, I thought about how sometimes losing something makes room for something better to grow. The Melissa drama wasn't the only challenge. About 2 months after opening, Bert from Trail Stop Bikes started a whisper campaign against me. According to customers who switched to my shop, he was telling people I was exploiting veterans for publicity, that the whole operation was a scam. I tried not to let it bother me, but one night I made the mistake of reading comments on a local news site's article about the shop. Among the supportive messages were ugly accusations that I'd staged the original video, that I was profiting off military goodwill, that I'd manipulated an old woman for viral fame. The old insecurities came roaring back, the voice in my head that always said I wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. I sat in the dark shop after closing, wondering if I was in over my head, if I'd eventually fail and let down everyone who believed in me. The next morning, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, I arrived to find 3 veterans waiting outside. They didn't mention my mood or the rumors. They just rolled up their sleeves and helped me prep for the day, telling stories about their service and pulling me back into the present moment with their steady presence. By afternoon, Mrs. Garrett had shown up with homemade cookies. Tyler and 5 other kids arrived for their repair class, full of energy and terrible jokes. A steady stream of customers came through, each one with a kind word or story about how the shop had helped them. "Screw Bird and his lies," said Hank, the veteran painter, as he touched up our sign. "You're our guy, Scott. We know who you are." That night, I thought about something my dad used to say during tough times. "A ship doesn't sink from the water around it, son. It sinks from the water that gets inside. Keep your crew loyal and your hull tight, and you'll weather any storm." My crew, Ellie, Frank, and his veterans, the kids who hung around the shop, the community that had embraced us, they were keeping my hull tight. Their belief in me was stronger than my own doubts. The weeks turned into months. Business was steady, not making me rich, but keeping the lights on and putting food on the table. More importantly, the shop was becoming exactly what Frank had envisioned, a gathering place, a classroom, a refuge. One night as Ellie and I walked home, she used chalk to draw on the sidewalk in front of the shop. When she finished, I saw she'd written, "My dad equals hero," in wobbly rainbow letters. "You like the shop, huh, kiddo?" I asked as we continued our walk home, her small hand in mine. She nodded seriously. "It's the best place ever. Tyler says you fixed his dad too, not just his bike." "What do you mean?" "He said his dad was sad when he came home, but now he smiles when he fixes things with Tyler. You fix that." I swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in my throat. "I didn't fix that, Ellie Belly. Tyler and his dad fixed it together. I just gave him a place to do it." She considered this. Skipping over a crack in the sidewalk, that's still fixing things. Just a different way. Kids, sometimes they see things more clearly than all the adults in the room. As we reached our front porch, Ellie turned to me with a mischievous grin. "So what are we fixing tomorrow?" I laughed, swinging her up onto my shoulders. "Tomorrow? Who knows? That's the best part about where we are now, kiddo." I spun in a circle, making her squeal with delight. This is just the beginning. 3 months flew by like a downhill ride with no brakes. What started as a crazy leap of faith had transformed into something I barely recognized, in the best possible way. Honor Wheels wasn't just a bike shop anymore. It had become the beating heart of the neighborhood. On any given day, you'd find an eclectic mix of people hanging around. Veterans drinking coffee in the corner, swapping stories that oscillated between hilarious and heartbreaking. Young couples getting their bikes tuned up for weekend rides. Kids sprawled on the floor with repair manuals. solemnly studying diagrams like they were preparing for some kind of pint-sized mechanic certification. The coffee machine had been Frank's idea. "A good cup of joe brings people together," he'd said, installing a commercial-grade espresso maker that I definitely couldn't afford. When I protested, he just waved me off. "Anonymous donation," he claimed, though the twinkle in his eye told a different story. Tyler had become my unofficial apprentice. At 11 years old, he already knew more about gear ratios and brake calibration than some mechanics I'd worked with. He'd strut around the shop with a small tool belt, chest puffed out, occasionally offering advice to grown men 3 times his size. "I'm practically a pro now," he informed me one afternoon while deftly truing a wheel. "Almost as good as you, Mr. Scott, except cooler." I raised an eyebrow at him. "Is that right? And who fixed your chain last week when you managed to wrap it around your rear axle 3 times? Tyler grinned, not even slightly embarrassed. That was a test. Wanted to see if you were paying attention. The kid was a handful, but watching him work with such focus, tongue stuck out the side of his mouth in concentration, reminded me of myself at that age, tinkering in Dad's garage. Those moments made all the stress of running a business worth it. And stress there was. Running a shop turned out to be a whole different ballgame than just working in one. Inventory, taxes, insurance, marketing. I was learning on the fly, often staying up late into the night watching YouTube tutorials on small business management while Ellie slept. About 2 months in, Frank and I launched our first major initiative, Bikes for Brave Kids. The concept was simple: collect donated bikes, fix them up, and give them to children of military families. For bikes beyond repair, we'd use the parts to build new ones. Nothing would go to waste. Word spread quickly through veteran networks and local schools. Soon our back room was overflowing with donated bikes in various states of disrepair. The veterans who hung around the shop became a volunteer restoration crew, each bringing their unique skills to the task. The first distribution day was something I'll never forget. We cleaned up the alley behind the shop, strung up lights, borrowed a grill from a neighboring restaurant. Pete, one of the veterans who'd shown up at my door that fateful morning, turned out to be a former chef. He flipped burgers and hot dogs with military precision, wearing an apron that read "Caution, food worth fighting for." 30 kids showed up with their families. Some of the parents were in uniform, others in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of military. All of them had the same look in their eyes when they watched their children select bikes, a mixture of pride, relief, and gratitude that made my throat tight. Tyler was there too, hovering near the bike he'd helped rebuild, a sleek blue mountain bike with custom grips. When a quiet boy about his age selected it, Tyler personally showed him all the features, speaking with an authority that made the adults exchange amused glances. As the boy rode away for a test spin, I overheard Tyler say to his father, who was back on deployment with a noticeable limp, "That bike's for both of you, sir. It's built tough." The sincerity in his voice nearly did me in. This kid who'd come to my old shop with a broken bike and tears in his eyes was now paying it forward, understanding intuitively what this was all about. One of the most unexpected developments came in the form of Jim Corwin, a Marine veteran in his 50s who started dropping by the shop in our 2nd month. Jim didn't talk much at first. He'd sit in the corner, nursing a coffee, watching everything with wary eyes. Frank quietly told me that Jim had severe PTSD from his time in Desert Storm, rarely left his apartment, and had been struggling since his return to civilian life decades ago. For weeks, Jim just observed. Then one day, he approached me after closing time as I was sweeping up. "It's quiet in here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Reminds me of my grandpa's garage back in Ohio. Used to help him fix lawnmowers when I was a kid." I stopped sweeping, sensing this was important. "You know anything about bikes?" Jim shrugged. "Not much, but I'm good with my hands. Or I was before." He trailed off, flexing fingers that trembled slightly. I made a split-second decision, reaching into my pocket. "Here," I said, holding out a spare key to the shop. "This is yours now. You come by whenever you want, even if we're closed. There's always bikes that need fixing." The look on Jim's face shocked, disbelief, then something close to hope. Told me everything I needed to know about what that key meant to him. It wasn't just access to a building. It was trust, purpose, a place where he belonged. Within a month, Jim had become our early morning guy. He'd be there at dawn, meticulously organizing tools, prepping the day's repair queue, making fresh coffee. Sometimes I'd arrive to find him teaching younger vets repair techniques, his hand steady now, his voice gaining confidence. The first time I heard Jim laugh, a real, full-body laugh, when Ellie told him a ridiculous joke about a bicycle and fish, I had to step into the back room because my eyes were getting suspiciously watery. Not everything was smooth sailing, though. About 4 months after opening, I noticed a sharp drop in new customers. A few regulars mentioned seeing negative reviews online about Honor Wheels. Curious, I did some digging and found a series of comments on local forums questioning our intentions, suggesting we were exploiting veteran goodwill for profit. The writing style was too polished to be random trolls. This was coordinated. I didn't have to wonder for long who was behind it. One of our customers, a reporter for a local news blog, confirmed that Bert from Trail Stop had hired a marketing firm to rebrand his shop and address competition, which apparently meant smearing us. I'd love to say the high road was my first instinct, but honestly, I wanted to march over to Trail Stop and have it out with Bert. Frank talked me down. Son, there's an old saying in the military. He told me over beers after closing. Never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty and the pig likes it. Still, reading those comments stung. Late at night, my insecurities would creep in. Maybe Bert was right. Maybe I was in over my head. Maybe I was just playing at being something I wasn't. The turnaround came from an unexpected source. Jim, who never used social media, don't trust computers, he'd grumble, had somehow caught wind of the situation. Without telling anyone, he made a handwritten sign and placed it in our window. Proud veteran-supported business. Ask us why we believe in Honor Wheels. Customers began taking photos of the sign, sharing their own stories of what the shop meant to them. A local TV station picked up on it, doing a small segment on community businesses making a difference. The reporter interviewed Jim, who stared uncomfortably at the camera but spoke with absolute conviction. "This place saved me," he said simply. "Scott doesn't just fix bikes. He fixes people." That soundbite spread faster than Bert's paid campaign ever could. The community rallied. Business doubled. The marketing firm quietly removed the negative reviews after one particularly stubborn veteran threatened legal action for defamation. Through all of this, Ellie remained my anchor, my reality check, and sometimes my most brutally honest critic. When I showed her professionally redesigned shop logo, she frowned and declared it boring. The next day, she presented me with her alternative, another winged bicycle, but this one shooting through space with stars and planets in the background. "Because your shop is like a whole universe for people," she explained, as if it were obvious. I laughed. "Kiddo, we're not SpaceX. I can't afford rocket-powered bikes." She fixed me with that look of exasperated patience that only children can truly master. "Dad, your workshop is bigger than just a place that fixes bikes. It's where people find they're happy again." Out of the mouths of babes, right? I had the Cosmic Bike printed on T-shirts for our 6-month anniversary celebration. They sold out in 2 hours. As Honor Wheels approached its first anniversary, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. There had been moments, like when a teenage girl burst into tears because we restored her late brother's BMX bike, or when a homeless veteran walked out with a reliable means of transportation and a part-time job. When I felt like maybe we were making a real difference. Goodness isn't about medals. My dad used to say, it's about someone smiling because of you. By that measure, we were accumulating quite a collection of medals. One evening, after a particularly busy day, I looked around the shop. Jim was teaching Tyler advanced brake adjustments. 2 Vietnam vets were arguing good-naturedly about the best route for the upcoming charity ride. Frank was showing Ellie how to use a cash register, her small face serious with concentration. Every corner was filled with life, connection, purpose. "We haven't changed the world yet," I said no one in particular, "but we're on our way." If someone had told me a year earlier that I'd be sitting in a New York studio about to go live on Good Morning America, I would have laughed myself sick. Yet there I was, Try not to sweat through my new shirt, the only one I own without grease stains, while makeup artist dabbed powder on my forehead. 3 minutes, Mr. McClear, a production assistant said cheerfully, adjusting my microphone. Frank sat nearby, looking annoyingly comfortable in the chaos. He'd insisted on accompanying me, claiming he wouldn't miss this for the world. I was grateful for his steady presence. When the camera started rolling, the host turned to me with a practiced smile. Scott McClear, you've been called the Bike Whisperer, the mechanic with heart, and the founder of what some are calling an empire kindness. How does it feel to have built something so meaningful in just 1 year? I couldn't help laughing. Empire? I'm just a guy who likes wrenches and loves his daughter. The rest kind of happened by accident. They played a clip then, that original video of me fixing Tyler's bike, standing up to Bert. Watching it felt like looking at another person's life, though it had only been a year. That bike changed everything, I told the host when the clip ended. But not for me, for the people who found honor wheels afterward, for the kids who learned to fix their own bikes, for the veterans who found a place to belong, for the community that came together. I'm just a guy with the tools. The interview lasted 7 minutes, an eternity in TV time, I was told. They asked about our programs, about the 3 new locations opening across Colorado, about the nonprofit status we'd recently acquired. I tried to keep my answers simple, authentic. The Scott who'd fumbled through that first day in the shop. What the cameras didn't capture was what had happened 2 months earlier. Frank had been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Short straw, he'd said with characteristic understatement. We all gotta go sometime. He'd refused most treatments, opting for palliative care only. Quality over quantity, he insisted. I've had a good run. The news had hit me like a physical blow. This man who'd knocked on my door and changed everything, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, who'd become like a second father to me and a grandfather to Ellie. The thought of losing him was unbearable. A week after the diagnosis, Frank had handed me an envelope. Open it when I'm gone, he'd said. Not a moment before understood. I'd protested, tried to talk about experimental treatments, second opinions. Frank had just smiled that Santa Claus smile. Scott, listen to me carefully. What we built together, that's my legacy. Your heart, your hands carrying on this work, that's all the immortality I need. Despite everything, Frank insisted on coming to New York for the interview. Might be my last adventure, he'd said, booking the tickets before I'd argue. After the show, as we flew back to Denver, Frank dozed in the seat beside me. I looked at his face, peaceful in sleep but marked by the illness that was taking him from us, and felt a fierce gratitude mixed with grief. 2 weeks later, we buried Frank with full military honors. The ceremony was packed. Hundreds of veterans, families from honor wheels, community members. Tyler stood ramrod straight in his first suit, eyes red but dry. Jim organized an honor guard of veteran bikers who escorted the hearse. Ellie placed one of her rainbow drawings in the casket, a bicycle with wings, riding across clouds. That night, alone in my kitchen, I finally opened Frank's envelope. Inside was a letter and a deed to property in Phoenix, Arizona. Scott, the letter read in Frank's distinctive handwriting. This is for the next honor wheels. The kids in Arizona need you too. Your heart is my greatest legacy. Keep pedaling, son. I cried then, really cried, for the first time since my father died. For Frank, for the gift he'd given me, for the trust he'd placed in me. Then I called the Arizona Veterans Association and started making plans. 6 months later, Honor Wheels Phoenix opened its doors. I didn't move there. Denver was home. But I visited monthly, training the local team, making sure Frank's vision lived on. It wasn't about Melissa being in Arizona. That chapter was closed. It was about continuing what Frank had started, about bikes and second chances and healing. These days, my life is full in ways I never imagined possible when I was just Scott the bike mechanic working for Bert. I still fix bikes. That will always be my first love. But now I also help fix communities, one pedal stroke at a time. This morning, walking Ellie to school, 9 years old now and full of opinions about everything, she looked up at me thoughtfully. Dad, she said, kicking at leaves on the sidewalk. When I grow up, I want to be like you. The simple statement nearly knocked me sideways. I swallowed hard before answering. Kiddo, don't be like me. Be better. That's how it's supposed to work. She considered this, then nodded. Okay, but I still want to help people fix things. Looking down at her, this amazing child who draws rainbows and cosmic bikes, who sees through adult nonsense with unerring accuracy, who survived her mother leaving and came out stronger. I felt a sudden clarity. I didn't save the world. I didn't even save Denver. But I became the father my daughter wants to become like. And maybe that's enough of a legacy. Life isn't about how far you've gone. It's about who you've lifted up along the way. My dad taught me that, and Frank reminded me. Now I'm teaching Ellie, and she'll teach someone else someday. As we rounded the corner to her school, Ellie's hand warm in mine. I thought about all the bicycles we'd fixed, all the lives that had intersected with ours because of the kid's broken bike and a moment of standing up for what was right. Kindness doesn't die. It keeps pedaling.